really one big
Oh,
student.
yes, Ray. She gets 2 cities.
That's right. Cheering. Here we go. Here we go, right here.
Thank you,
Hi,
Mayor.
Mayor.
Welcome.
Good to see you.
Hi. Great.
Good to see
Okay,
you.
let's get started. I'm very proud to be joined. By, of course, my friend and colleague, Speaker Pelosi, Mayor Nan Whaley from Dayton. Welcome, Mayor. Hi. Good to have you here. Thank you. And I want to thank my colleagues, Senators Brown and Stabenow, for joining, as well as Representative Escobar of El Paso, Texas, and Representative Thompson, who chairs the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. Now, we're here today for one simple reason. Too many Americans are losing their lives to gun violence. Too many families are just weeping because they've lost loved ones. I was at the airport today. A gentleman came over to me. I didn't know who he was, but he said, "Thank you for what you're doing. I lost my nephew to gun violence last year." Americans are suffering from this, from the abundance of gun violence in America. Last month, mass shootings claimed 51 lives in El Paso, Dayton, and Odessa, to say nothing of the hundreds of lives lost by daily gun violence throughout America. Enough is enough. Congress is returning to session, and our first order of business in the Senate should be to pass the House-passed Bipartisan Background Checks Act, H.R. 8. The legislation is the quickest way to make a law that will save American lives. In terms of what's both effective and can pass, it's at the acme of that. It's right at the intersection of what is really effective and what can pass. From a policy perspective, we must close the loophole in our background check system to make other gun safety laws effective. The loopholes, I was the House author, the author of the Brady Law. We didn't know about online, so we didn't prohibit that. And gun shows in those days were to show off antique guns. And these loopholes now account for 40% of gun sales. And the people who want to get around a background check, who are felons or spousal abusers or adjudicated mentally ill, go online or go to gun shows. You can pass a strong red flag law, but it would be largely ineffective if gaping loopholes in our background check system existed, because you'd be red flagged and then you could go online and get a gun. So background checks are the base from which we must do everything. In our view, it's paramount to pass the House bill as part of any gun safety package, because it would sew up the most egregious loopholes that allow criminals, the adjudicated mentally ill, spousal abusers, to get guns. 2 people in Washington can make sure the background checks bill passes: Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. It is totally up to them. Totally up to them, and it is on their shoulders. They can't escape that responsibility. Leader McConnell, as you all know, determines the Senate's business. When he refused to bring the Senate back into session after each of the 3 shootings, he might have been hoping that the issue would fizzle out before we returned. That hasn't happened and won't happen, unfortunately, because mass shootings are occurring virtually all the time. The issue of gun safety is going to be front and center until we do something meaningful. The question now is whether Leader McConnell will allow the Senate to consider the House-passed background checks bill on the Senate floor. That is the #1 question looming over this Capitol as we return. For now, Leader McConnell says it's up to President Trump. If the president took a position on a bill, he said, "I'd be happy to put it on the floor." That might seem like an attempt to pass the blame around, but truly, it means that President Trump has a historic opportunity to save lives by indicating his support for the House-passed bill. Speaker Pelosi and I have repeatedly and personally asked him to do this. He can lead the party, his party, to support something that the NRA has prevented Republicans from supporting for years. And that's why Speaker Pelosi and I sent the letter to him today, urging him to give his party political cover to pass meaningful background check legislation. We have a message for President Trump now. President Trump, this bill is common sense. It's overwhelmingly supported by Democrats, Republicans, gun owners, and those who don't own guns. And it would save many, many, many American lives. President Trump, if you announce your support, we can get something incredible done for the American people. The time to act is now. Speaker Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Leader Schumer, for bringing us together here this afternoon, stating that our first order of business is to save lives by passing, hopefully in the Senate, the bill passed in the House, the gun violence prevention. I want to remind everyone that Mr. Schumer was a leader in the House when this legislation was passed in the 90s. The rest of us were his lieutenants who ran around trying to get votes. But he took the lead on passing very progressive legislation at that time. And as he indicated, since that time, there have been ways to evade some of the background checks, some that were predictable and some not. The online sales are a new phenomenon. So this is, just to be clear, a simple bill, a bill, H.R. 8, so named because it was 8 years from the time when Gabby Giffords' town meeting was assaulted by gun violence and people died. This bill, under leadership of Mike Thompson, the chair of our task force on gun violence prevention, put this bill together in a bipartisan way, passed it, sent it to the Senate as a companion bill, H.R. 1211, which modifies the timetable. But just think of it, it's very simple. Online sales, person-to-person sales, which was how one of the most recent gun violence episodes took place because somebody bought it from a person-to-person, online, and gun shows. Again, as was indicated, whose purpose was something quite different at the time. So this isn't radical. It's just an expansion of what has been successful already. When we passed our bill and these incidents occurred during the break, I wrote to the president and asked him to call the Senate back immediately to pass Mr. Thompson's bill, H.R. 8, and Mr. Clyburn's legislation. He was very positive about it. He said, I'm going to talk to Leader Schumer, I talked to Leader McConnell about getting something done. I had the impression that he understood that lives were at stake. My message to the president, to Leader McConnell, is the following. There isn't anyone in this institution or anywhere else in public life whose political survival is more important than the survival of our children and the safety of our communities. We are not taking no for an answer. We're not going away. Leading up to this, the first day of our session coming back after the district work period, I want to report how proud I am that across the country, hundreds of meetings were held, whether a town meeting, a press conference, whatever, to speak out to pass this legislation. 90% at least of the public supports it, including gun owners, members of the NRA, and the rest. So when they say the president's base is opposed to it, 90-some% of the American people support it. What courage does it take to support legislation that will save lives? So here we are once again asking the Grim Reaper, informing the Grim Reaper that these bills are alive and well in the public, that public opinion, public sentiment will weigh in. And as I have said in our meetings across the country, we will make this issue too hot for him to handle. But some of the gun violence prevention groups have made it up the ante even further to say that if this bill is not passed, Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate and the president will have hell to pay. So let's save time. Let's just get it done now. We have important reasons why. We know about the mass shootings, and they're just stunningly heartbreaking. But every single night, every single day across the country, gun violence occurs that this bill could prevent, lives that could be saved. And I was so moved by the paper this morning. The Washington Post had the article about Missy and little Mo, her twin brother, 15 years old. They were so close since birth, honor students in high school. He left to go buy some cereal or something, never came back. I wish you'd read that story. I wish the president would read that story to see how this hits home for so many of America's families. Nobody can tell us a story better or more recently about that than our next presenter, really our VIP here today. Senator Brown calls her the best mayor in America. I don't know if I'd spread that word throughout Ohio, but that's what he just said. So let us welcome Mayor Whaley, Mayor of Dayton. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Leader.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and I'm certainly grateful for Leader Schumer and Speaker Pelosi for inviting me here today. And it's always a pleasure to be with my mentor and good friend, Senator Sherrod Brown. No offense to the other senators, who I believe is the best senator in the country.
We believe he's the best senator from Ohio.
There you go. There you go.
Thank you, Chuck. Always a high compliment.
You know, actually, while the Senate and the House are getting back to work, I wish I was back home in Dayton. But we have come, mayors from across the country, to come to get one thing done, and that is to get an up or down vote on H.R. 8. That's the only reason why we're here. We're meeting with the White House. We're meeting with anyone who will listen to us about what this has done to our community. This morning, I got a note from Monica Brickhouse's mother, who heard that I was coming here, and she sent me a text, and she had a very simple message: go get them. And that's how the victims' families feel about this work. That's how the victims who are still trying to get their lives together feel about this work. They want us to do something. And so that's why I'm here today and tomorrow, compelling the Senate to just have an up or down vote to act on what the House passed in February. Since February, Gilroy, Virginia Beach, Dayton, El Paso, Odessa, and Midland, just since February. What's going to happen next week or the week after if we could just pass a simple vote where 9 out of 10 Americans agree on it? I don't know anything else that 9 out of 10 Americans agree on besides H.R. 8. So that's why we're here. I'm here on behalf of the citizens of Dayton who called us that night to do something. This is something that can be done, can be fast, and will save lives. I'm so grateful to be here, and I hope to get back to Dayton soon. Thank you.
Senator Brown.
Chuck, thank you, and Mayor Whaley, thank you. You give a lot of coverage to a young Midwestern mayor recently from Indiana, and you should be paying attention to this one too, not to tell the media how to do its job. So, Chuck, thank you, and Madam Speaker, thank you. It's good to be with all of my colleagues, Mike and Debbie and Congresswoman Escobar. On Sunday morning in early August, Connie and I woke up in Cleveland and checked our phones and saw what had happened in Dayton. I called Mayor Whaley immediately. She told me that she had already heard from, literally, your words, several dozen mayoral colleagues around the country. Many of them had had shootings in their communities. All of them empathized with Dayton. Many of them were giving instructions and ideas and thoughts about what Nan should do, what Mayor Whaley should do as a result. That's the story too often in our country. Connie and I then drove the 3.5 hours to go to Dayton that day, spent the day in Dayton with Nan, and we didn't see victims' families that day. But then 3 days later, I came back when the President of the United States landed Air Force One at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Mayor Whaley and I greeted him, as did other elected officials, Senator Portman, Governor DeWine, and Congressman Turner and others at the bottom of Air Force One, at the bottom of the steps. Nan and I looked him in the eye and said, Mr. President, please call the Senate. Please call Senator McConnell, ask him to bring the Senate back. Please promise Senator McConnell you will sign the bill, the House bill that is passed, you will sign that bill this week. The President said he would do something. Later that day, Nan and I and others joined the President at the hospital as he met with families, with Some people who were in their hospital beds injured, some very serious injuries. A number of people came back that had less serious injuries. We know that 40 gunshots were fired in those 31 seconds. After the president left the room, the president and all of us left the room where the 6 Dayton police officers were heralded as heroes, which they decidedly were heroes. 31 seconds from the first shot until they killed the shooter, saving literally dozens more lives. After the president left that room, I said to the president he said, we're going to have the biggest honors ever. We're going to have the biggest congressional medal ever, the biggest presidential medal ever for these heroes. I said, Mr. President, the way you could honor them, the most important way you could honor them is to pass the Senate, the legislation that the House has passed, and pass it is get this through and help us pass it, and call on Senator McConnell and do it this week. Mayor Whaley followed and said the same things to the president. Again, he said he was going to do something big. We know after he came back to Washington and he met with the gun lobby, we know what's happened. But we've got to act. That night in Dayton, in a rally, an impromptu vigil and rally, people just began to shout, began to chant, do something, do something, do something. And this is our chance. This is our chance for the Senate to do something this week. This is the chance for our country to do something. This is a chance for the president to do something, to pass common sense gun legislation. You start with background checks, other things we need to do for common sense gun legislation. There's no reason we should delay. We need to do something now. My pleasure to introduce Congresswoman Escobar, who I have watched from afar. I only met her today. I've seen her on TV. I have seen her just in a space of only 8 months play a significant national role in this debate and on immigration issues and other issues. My pleasure to present Congresswoman Escobar.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Thank you all so much for being here. And Madam Speaker and Leader Schumer, thank you for calling us together on this first day back from our in-district work period. Representative Thompson, thank you for H.R. 8 and for the leadership that you've shown. I returned to El Paso ready for a very productive and important district work period where I intended to spend all of August meeting with my constituents about lowering the cost of prescription drugs, about health care, about immigration, about all the things that my community has been talking about and that we've been discussing at town hall meetings and at various community events. And instead of being able to do that, the first Saturday back from Washington in El Paso, Texas, as I was at a town hall meeting with my constituents, I learned that there was an active shooter at Walmart. And the 3 weeks that followed that were 3 weeks of funerals, of sitting by people's bedside, praying with families, talking to constituents who are scared and who don't understand why this had to happen. And what I kept hearing over and over and over again from El Pasoans was, why? Why did this happen? Why haven't you done something to stop this? Why hasn't the Senate Majority Leader felt our pain? I've had constituents ask me what it's going to take for Mitch McConnell to see the blood that we saw spilled in our community and to feel the torturous pain that we have felt as we have tried to recover from something that has deeply traumatized a beautiful, vibrant, magical community. And it is a very difficult question to answer because truly, as the speaker mentioned, when the vast majority of Americans agree on something, and it doesn't take tremendous courage to take action on what people are demanding of us, we have to wonder why. What is stopping action from happening? How many more lives have to be taken in my state days after El Paso when we got the notice that someone who failed a background check and who purchased a gun through a loophole that could have been closed with H.R. 8, there was more blood on the streets in Texas, more blood on the hands of those who choose not to take action. We have to do something, and the American people are demanding that of us, and we deserve to take that action. You know, I've heard people tell me that while H.R. 8 could have prevented Odessa, it would not have prevented El Paso. H.R. 8 is the beginning of what Americans want from their Congress. It is the beginning of what they want from their government. And perhaps that is why Mr. McConnell is so afraid, because it is the beginning of what the American people want over the long term. They want change. They want a country that is safe. They want communities where they can walk without fear of assault weapons or people who should not have access to guns. We are going to be unrelenting. We are not going to stop until we deliver the safety that this country deserves, and until people in my community know that their government works for them and not the special interest groups. I want to say very quickly in Spanish, brevemente, estamos aquí reunidos porque ya es tiempo para el cambio. Lo que sucedió en El Paso fue una tragedia y necesitamos traer cambios a nuestro país. Merecemos seguridad. Merecemos un país donde podemos vivir juntos sin miedo. Y nosotros vamos a seguir trabajando hasta que podemos traer estos cambios que merecemos. Gracias. Thank you.
Senator Stabenow.
Thank you so much for your passion, Congresswoman, and advocacy. And Mayor, thank you for being with us. It's always an honor to stand with Leader Schumer and Speaker Pelosi and all of my colleagues. I don't think there's been a more important moment for us to be staying together to push forward. This last week, my grandson started second grade in Michigan, and my daughter shared with me that as he was going to school, they were watching the front doors be rebuilt and bulletproof glass be putting on the doors and restructuring how the children were going to be able to walk to get to their classroom. What we wanted to be talking about was adding new opportunities with teachers and technology and art and music and all the other wonderful things that this very, very good school wants to provide. But that's where they're spending their money right now, because that's where they have to spend their money. Whether it's a school, a store, a movie house, whether it's a child that is sitting in front of the TV and gets shot through the window by random bullets, this has got to stop. This gun violence has to stop. Tomorrow, our Democratic Policy and Communications Committee is releasing a report that shows that 100 Americans are killed by guns every single day. 100. Since the House passed the bipartisan background checks bill, we've had 19,400 people killed by firearms, 11,834 gun suicides, and 77 children, 777 children that have been killed by firearms. The American people do expect us to do our jobs. The House did their job. The Senate needs to do its job and take action to make people's lives better and safer. Unfortunately, this is not happening, and American families are paying the price every single day. 194 days ago, think about that, 194 days ago and counting, the House passed H.R. 8. 194 days ago. And yet this just sits with Mitch McConnell at his desk gathering dust. And we know that it is the leader, Republican leader, and the Republican president who can do something about it. Not point fingers at each other, but actually take action to do something about it. This isn't the only issue, certainly, that they are holding up. But it is clear that we need action now. So while Mitch McConnell and Republicans are waiting for approval from big money special interests, Americans are dying. It's time to act. Mitch McConnell, what are you waiting for? Congressman Thompson, and we thank you for your leadership.
Well, thank you, Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer, for calling this event together. And I'm proud to stand with my colleagues here today on behalf of all Americans who know it's important that we pass H.R. 8 and we expand background checks. Too many people are being killed. 30 people every day are killed by someone using a gun. And as Debbie pointed out, if you factor in suicides and accidents, it's 100 people a day. There are so many mass shootings, you lose track of the number. The press has stopped reporting on all the mass shootings that we have. It is an epidemic that we are facing in this country. And background checks will help. We know it will. Every day, background checks that are currently under the law stop 170 felons from buying a gun. They stop 50 domestic abusers every day from buying a gun. But as you've heard, those same prohibited individuals can walk out of a gun store and walk down the street to a computer store, go online and buy the same gun. They can walk across the street to a gun show and buy the same gun. It's a problem. And it's a problem that we can easily fix by passing H.R. 8 and expanding background checks to the sale and transfer of all firearms. Our constituents are crying out for help. I can't tell you over the district work period how many students came up to me and said, will our school be next? How many parents and grandparents and children said, when are you going to do something? Is our school, is our community going to be next? And no one's exempt. The safest communities in the world are falling victim to these problems. And as was pointed out already, with school beginning, kids should be excited about going to school, excited about learning. Parents should be excited about buying new clothes for their kids and school supplies. The number one item to purchase for your back-to-school kids should not be a bulletproof backpack. This is absolutely insane. And Senator McConnell can do something about it. He can bring this bill to the floor, he can pass this bill, the president can sign it, and we can save lives. It is insanity that the only place in the United States of America where universal background checks is a partisan issue is in the Congress of the United States of America. Over 90% of the American people want this passed. Mitch McConnell, do your job. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your leadership on this issue, Congressman. We're going to take just a few questions on this subject only.
Thank you so much. The point that the Speaker made, you're going to make this too hot to handle. Justice Barr, you said that you're going to be unrelenting. It's been more than a month since we've had new shootings. Why in that period of time has that not been enough? I mean, I know everybody's just getting back into town today, but why was that interim period not enough to make this too hot?
It keeps growing and growing because there's more gun violence. Look at the number of incidents that occurred while we were away. It's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. Yes.
Are you prepared to hold up spending bills over forcing?
Look, our first job is to get Leader McConnell to put this on the floor. That's where our focus is right now, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep pushing him to get this on the floor. Yes?
Sir, as you well know, gun legislation has languished on Capitol Hill for almost 2 decades now. So what makes you confident, what makes you hopeful that now will be?
It's a different era. Never have we had 93% of the American people for background checks. Never have we had 80% of gun owners for background checks. Never have we had so many people in the NRA for background checks. Last one.
When was the last time you spoke with the president about this topic? And do you have a clear idea right now from the White House on what he would sign?
I've spoken to him a few times in the last month, and he's all over the lot. I mean, he tells people right after an incident, I'm going to get the strongest bill ever. And then he fades back from that. But the pressure is not going away. And I think the reason that this issue is out front today, not just a month ago, not just when we left, is because the pressure is mounting, and people know that voters, not just Democratic voters or urban voters, but voters throughout America want this bill done. That's what builds the pressure. Do you want to say something, Speaker?
I just want to say that when the first mass murder occurred during this break, I sent a letter to the president, as I mentioned earlier, asking him to call Congress back. At the time, he was very enthusiastic, as I mentioned earlier, said he would speak to Leader Schumer, Chuck, and he would speak to Mitch, Leader McConnell, kind of almost enthusiastically embracing the idea. But what I'm afraid it may have been is a way to defang the issue for the moment, because we haven't seen any evidence of good intention since then. But since then, we have had meetings across the country. We've heard from the victims or their family and the families of victims of gun violence. We've heard from healthcare professionals about the trauma and what this means to our children. For our children, stop this. We've heard from law enforcement. There's one letter with 2 pages of a list of law enforcement chiefs of police from major communities across the country asking for gun violence prevention legislation. So we're meeting today. Tomorrow, under the leadership of the task force that Mr. Thompson chairs, we will be having a hearing, very well participated in, excellent witnesses. I hope you will cover it. The mayor is here, Mayor Whaley is here. The mayors will be having their own press event. Every town will be having events with some of the mayors. A beat goes on, and we want a vote now on a clean bill to get this done. And we're not going to let the subject be changed or diminished in any way. And so, again, the president said positive things. We quote that in a letter.
He said he wanted, when I talked to him right after the speaker, he said he wanted the strongest possible bill. That's what he said. I want the strongest possible bill. And never, never, never have we seen the breadth of this issue be so wide and the depth of this issue be so strong. It ain't going away. Sherrod wanted to say something, and then we're going to have to. Yeah.
And President Trump told Mayor Whaley and me that he would push for a strong bill. Why is this different now from what it was a month ago? It's different because Republican senator after Republican senator in states like Maine and North Carolina and Arizona and Colorado, senators that are fearful of what's going to happen in their reelection fights are out campaigning in August, and they're hearing from voter after voter after voter, you got to do something. They in turn are going to be talking to McConnell. McConnell's going to feel the pressure not just from all of us, not just from the 93% that Congressman Thompson talks about. He's going to hear it from his own members because they're hearing it from that 93%.
Thank you, everybody.
The chief opposition to universal background